I call to order the September 4th, 2019 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone in the audience to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we start due roll call, there's a possibility that our treasurer will have to leave at a certain time, and in order to make sure things continue to flow, in her absence, I need a motion to nominate, it's not a board member, right? It is a board member. I need a motion to nominate a board member as treasurer pro tempore.
Madam Chair, I nominate Mike Morawski.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
With money.
All right,
You beat
Mr.
me to it.
Morawski, you will be elected to serve as treasurer pro tem. Okay, Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Present.
Present.
Mrs. Bowers? Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Messer? Mr. Morawski?
Here.
President Jones?
Here, thank you. Okay, so we don't have any minutes for today. The minutes from the August 26th board meeting will be presented for approval at the September 16th, 2019 regular business meeting. Superintendent, please introduce our first presentation of the morning.
Gladly. So each board meeting, we would like to provide a short update to the implementation of the strategic plan, and we have our Chief Communications Officer, Lauren Worley, who will update you on our goal and the board's priority around growth.
Thank you, Superintendent and Treasurer Wagner and board members. Great to be with you this morning for a brief presentation about our fifth goal of the strategic plan, growth. So, as you know, our growth goal is that we are our community's first choice for education, delivering exceptional educational experiences and empowering our families to choose CPS as their destination school district. So our strategy is to increase the CPS market share by positioning us as the educational provider of choice and actively recruiting families to CPS schools. So we have three ways that we're going to do this, and the first one is the strategic measure I'm going to talk about this morning, and that's increasing the district's enrollment market share for grades K through 12 from 64% to 66% in 3 years. Now that percentage jump probably doesn't sound like a lot when you just look at it from there, but when you're talking about 3% of 36,000 is quite a bit. So for this year, we look for the 2019 school year was to increase our student enrollment by 398 students to 65.5% of the market share. We're all becoming very familiar with this chart in front of you. This is our KDD chart for a project that Sarah Trimble Oliver and I spearheaded on recruiting charter school students specifically back to the district. Our goal was to increase the return of charter school students to CPS to increase enrollment. Specifically, we looked at 11 neighborhood schools that had enrollment capacity, and we wanted to return 10% of those students back to the schools. And so we wanted to see what we could do over the summer to reach those goals. You'll see there in the center, these are our drivers involving our students and families, strong neighborhood relationships and partnerships, having positive student and family relationships, creating a welcoming school environment and a positive school culture, and then distributing accurate, factual information about our CPS curriculum and all the other amazing opportunities we have for our kids. Even more specifically, we wanted to take a look at Bond Hill because we knew the Regeneration School was opening in that neighborhood, and we really wanted to focus to not only maintain the existing student enrollment at Bond Hill of 337 students, but also try to expand the enrollment by 25 students. Again, you'll see those drivers that we looked at, and we implemented the strategies on the far right. Now, I've lived in Cincinnati long enough to tell people you don't tell your chili recipe, so I'm not going to go into all the specifics on every single one of the interventions since this is a publicly broadcasted meeting. But here are some of the things that we worked on. Professional media training. We did a SWOT analysis on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats for our Bond Hill Academy School. We had several math and science discovery days that were spearheaded by the team at Bond Hill, Principal Renee Crawford, Les Henry, her resource coordinator, our partner Family Forward, that's the lead agency, and other partners in the school. We improved the school's social media presence, and we did some earned media. Our total outreach budget, that doesn't include staff time, was $8,419. And I'm pleased to report this morning that we have maintained Bond Hill's Academy's enrollment. We were at 332 in October 2018, that's the main count. Midway through the year, we were at 337, and today we're at 329. We know with processing the enrollments that we have coming in over these next 2 weeks or so, that number will likely meet 332 and hopefully exceed that. And this is despite, again, all the heavy recruitment that you likely have seen online in the news media from the Regeneration School. So despite all their efforts to recruit kindergarten and first grade students, we were able to maintain our enrollment at the school. I mentioned that we had 10 other neighborhood schools that have capacity for additional enrollment. And I mentioned earlier that our goal was to increase that by 169 students. So here's the early numbers, and again, these are very early, right, Sarah? These are so don't go to the bank with these numbers. But the light blue on the left there is our enrollment in October 2018. The purple is where we're currently at in terms of enrollment. So you'll see in most cases we maintain. Where you see dips, we're talking about 2 or 3, maybe 5 students, so they're not statistically significant. And in many cases, as in Euler School, we've actually increased enrollment in those schools. This is an exciting chart because I told you that our goal was 169 charter school students. So far, we have enrolled 450 charter school students back in the district and 65 students back from private schools. So again, these are our early enrollment numbers. We mentioned that our strategic measure was to increase the number of students at CPS by 398 students. Drum roll, please. Our current enrollment is up 1,110 students, and we are still processing enrollments. And no-shows. So really important to factor that aspect of it in. We'll have some of these students that won't arrive, they won't be on paper. We'll have those final numbers in October. But I think this is all super relevant for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that the interventions we're putting in place to recruit people back were working. So some conclusions from this work over the summer: non-traditional marketing with low financial investment can really help maintain the enrollment. Community engagement is mission critical. Board members attended 16 community council meetings during the summer, and that increased connection to the neighborhood school is really important. And we know that additional traditional marketing will reach a wider audience. So our opportunities for the 2020-21 campaign is we do still have some enrollment capacity at key neighborhood schools. There could be additional charter school closures, and we did likely benefit from at least 3 charter schools that closed, bringing those students back to CPS. And our opportunity is to listen to our ever-changing customer, the millennial parent, who's making decisions about where they live based on things about the school environment and the neighborhood in which they live, not because they have necessarily a job here. The threats, if you've turned on the radio at any point or turn in online, is increased competition from charter and non-public schools. I heard an ad for McNicholas High School on my drive in this morning. This was on Parent Magazine, last night's website. There'll be an unknown number of charter and non-public closures this year, and again, our ever-changing customers and what they're looking for. And when we use the word customers, we mean our families, but we really do think of them as our customers. So finally, I wanted to just give you an update on a couple initiatives we have going into the 2020-21 school year that are already in play. We're listening to our students and our parents through coherent, common conversations. We really want to hear from parents and students why they choose Cincinnati Public Schools and what would make them not choose to send their kid to Cincinnati Public School. You're going to see more surgical marketing efforts. And what I mean by that is if we're actually targeting students to increase the enrollment at Chase School, the kind of digital ads and communication we'll be doing to parents to choose Chase School won't be visible in the Bond Hill neighborhood or visible in Silverton. So you may not see a billboard everywhere, but that doesn't mean that we're not out there marketing it. The digital ads can be very prescriptive to the audience that's looking for that information. And finally, is that increased community engagement. Our partner in the Bond Hill example, Families Forward, was a great partner for us when we were trying to keep our families there, and we're really grateful for their support. The last thing I wanted to update you on is we've had our first parent conversation with parents of the Bond Hill Academy, and the stuff we got from that was just too good not to share with you this morning, so I wanted to share a couple snippets. Cohere brought together parents, mothers, who either have children in Bond Hill Academy, have transferred their kids to Bond Hill Academy, have transferred their kids out of Bond Hill Academy, and a couple mothers who were making a decision about what school they wanted to send their kid to. Here's what they said that was positive about Bond Hill Academy. The moms said Bond Hill had a mama vibe, and they liked that. They felt very comfortable there when they went to drop off their kids, that the neighborhood was looking out for their kids as well, and the teachers and everyone was looking out for them. One of the moms said this school is one of the best kept secrets. She had had her kid in another CPS school, but had moved to Bond Hill neighborhood, moved right across the street, so she enrolled her kid there, and she could not say more about the opportunities at the school. And she's like, why don't more people know about this? But the last comment was the one that really hit home with me, and it was a mother who said, you know, what's great about the teachers here at Bond Hill is that they will call before there's a problem. So before her daughter was having an issue, she's like, your daughter seems a little off today. What, you know, is everything cool at home, that type of thing. But then the teacher asked a second question, and this wasn't just one teacher, it was said by every person who was at this event. They said, the teachers or the staff said, and how are you doing? And every single one of those moms said, the school not only cares about my child, they also care about me. And for those moms, it didn't matter anything else about Bond Hill. I could be like Razzle Dazzle, Robot Club, and more, and Safety Patrol, and I was telling them everything about the school offered. They were thrilled that that school, they knew their child was in a safe place because the teachers and the staff in that school took the extra mile to care about them. And that is the secret sauce that makes Cincinnati Public so special, despite all this growth. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Do board members have questions or comments? Ms. Bolton?
Yes, thank you. I will always say, or have said for a while, by the end of the strategic plan, we're going to be at 40,000 students. And so we better get ready for that. I mean, I think this growth is great. Several questions, if I could, real quickly. I appreciate the enrollment piece, but also later on we have to talk in terms of the physical growth. But this is good to start with the enrollment since that's what we know. Appreciate that. Also, do we know what the enrollment at Regeneration is?
We don't.
I would really like to know that. There's always, even though we were not interested in that school because of the direct instruction piece, there is that market for direct instruction by some families.
If I may, just for the purposes of this, we assumed 200. We knew they were adding kindergarten and first grade, so we made a presumption that they could accommodate 200, but it's unlikely they could hold that many in the first year.
It'd be great to know that.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I don't know the exact enrollment number for Regeneration yet and the number of students. We will be able to see it if there are students. They're also drawing from Norwood and a couple other places that wouldn't be in our boundaries. But for the purposes of our project that we did over the summer, we assumed they had room for 200 kids. So that was kind of what we went into thinking those were the number of kids we would need.
But you said something about kindergarten and first grade.
Oh, I believe this school is only kindergarten and first grade.
Kindergarten and first grade.
At least in the first year.
Could I continue?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No. What role has the preschool enrollment played in that expansion?
Preschool enrollment is huge, and the partnership that our interim early childhood director, Vera Brooks, has with the enrollment team and the marketing team is stellar. She's going to give a presentation later because that's strategic measure 5B, which is on the preschool. But one of the most important, not later today, but later in the future, one of the most important things we've been working on over the past year and this summer is that movement from preschool to kindergarten. We had a lot of people who were not moving from CPS preschool to CPS kindergarten for a variety of issues, but we've worked on taking away the problems that we can control, meaning making the application process easier, getting out to the preschools early and making sure they know that they either have a seat in that neighborhood school for kindergarten, or if they're attending a preschool where we're not going to have room for them, making sure that they know another option.
Board Member Bolts, if I could, we opened 10 new preschool classrooms this year, but I need to get the exact number in terms of where are we in terms of filling our preschool classrooms. We do know that we've seen growth at Vine, which is exciting. Vera, do you have an update on that? Overall?
Overall, as of... She needs to come to the mic so people can...
Thank you. We try to answer your questions as quickly as possible.
Get the experts.
First, I want to say thank you to Ms. Worley's team because they have been awesome all summer long with helping us with supplies and just really promoting CPS throughout the city. So thank you, appreciate it. As of last week, which would be last Thursday, we had enrolled 1,601 typical students. Adding on our students with disabilities, we were at 1,779 students enrolled and being processed. So that meant our typical enrollment was at 85.43%, and our students with disabilities, students enrolled were at 81.30%. At Bond Hill specifically, one of our classrooms, we have about 11 seats still open that we are processing, in the middle of processing.
Thank you. Just real quickly, too, I think that the mama thing is very good because if you listen to some of the advertising for healthcare and everything, it's like a mother standard of care. That seems to be working in an advertisement piece. Just finally, are we concentrating or figuring out two things? One, where we have economic development and we have, quote, gentrification or a change of population. Have we figured out a strategy to attract the newer people to a neighborhood school that may not have been there for a period of time? I think that's a part of the niche marketing that needs to be done. And again, I maintain us having to list 100% free and reduced lunch is a marketing mistake at the schools where it isn't. It would be very good, again, to really know what the percentages of free and reduced lunch actually are at each building. Thanks. Thank you. Great work.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? I just want to remark that me personally, I'm much more pleased about the aggressive and proactive approach to recruiting charter school and Catholic schools, parochial schools back to the district rather than butting heads all the time. I think that for me, that seems the most practical, realistic way to do our job, which is help our district grow. So I thank you for that. I think we've seen some very positive results as a result of that. So.
All 65 of our schools are wonderful, and they
Yes.
each have a personality. And we're able to share that with people through innovative needs, and we're excited to keep doing it next year, as long as the superintendent and everyone gets us buildings to put them in. But that's a separate presentation.
Thank you. Not saying that we won't ever bump heads, but I just think this is much more practical to do. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Superintendent Mitchell, our next presentation, please.
Yes, I'd like to call Dr. Monica Mitchell from Children's Hospital to come up to the podium. You know that Children's Hospital is one of our great partners, and so this morning Dr. Mitchell is going to provide a longitudinal study presentation regarding some work that she's been doing with CPS as it relates to kindergarten readiness.
Thank you, Laura Mitchell. So I'm really happy to be here. Innovations, I don't know how many of you know about Innovations, but Innovations has been a long-term partner of Cincinnati Public Schools. We're based in Cincinnati Children's Hospital as a program evaluation arm of the hospital. We work with Cincinnati Public Schools on a number of initiatives, including evaluating your after-school programs, your community learning centers, and one of our earliest collaborations was to produce the kindergarten readiness report for the district starting in 2004. And it's gone on until the present time. So that will really be the basis of the presentation that I'll be giving today. So just a little bit of background. Over the 15 plus years that we've been evaluating the kindergarten readiness trends for the district, we've seen tremendous improvement, as you may know. Kindergarten readiness has gone from 44% readiness for CPS students to now, for the first time, being over 60%. So that's been a great win. For those kids who are in CPS preschools, the kindergarten readiness rate is about 69%. And a big reason why that happens is because of the great work that's happening in the early childhood department in enrolling kids. But we also know some things about attendance and so forth. So really this study that I'll be presenting is made possible because of the longitudinal data that we had available. So we decided to kind of break the study into two parts. The first study was looking at kindergarten readiness as it relates to the preschool outcomes, and then the second study was looking at kindergarten readiness as it relates to the K through 12 outcomes. So again, Innovations really preserved the data thanks to our relationship with CPS, and we took the first three cohorts, which were the 2004, 05, 06, and 06, 07 cohorts, because those kids have now graduated. And we wanted to really look comprehensively and say, what are really the predictors from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 that points to student achievement? And I don't want to get too technical, I want to keep it high level, but essentially for kindergarten, we wanted to look at kids who were on track and not on track during kindergarten, and we also wanted to look at the three bands. So band 3, which is the highest, versus bands 2 and 1. So just as I talk, I'll be really talking about kids in those kind of groups. And everything that I'll be reporting is statistically significant. So if I say, wow, these kids seem to do better than these kids, I'm not going to be talking anecdotally. I'm going to be speaking in terms of we know that these kids did better because these kids were statistically significantly better. So let me talk first about the first study, where we looked at kindergarten readiness as it related to preschool outcomes. So we wanted to learn two things. First, we wanted to learn how were kindergarten and preschool related. So if we looked at kids in kindergarten, what did we know about their preschool experience? And then preschool experience aside, we wanted to know were there differences related to gender, race, and income, regardless of their preschool participation. So this chart is really interesting. So if you can't see it, you may want to be able to look at it, because we actually had enough data to look at all the kids across each different time frame. And what you'll see if you look at the bottom numbers is we had 8,200 kids across the three cohorts, and then as time went on, there was natural attrition, as you know, just from as you would have in any school district. And then if you look at the next to the bottom, you can see the kids who are not on track and on track, and you can see just how that kind of panned out with the attrition. So let me just talk about what we learned from the preschool outcomes. So what we learned is that children with preschool experience were essentially more likely to be on track, exactly 1.23 times more likely to be on track than kids who didn't have preschool experience. And then kids with 2 years of preschool experience were more likely than kids with 1 year preschool experience. And I think we anecdotally know this, but it was good to put numbers to it. We also knew, and this was probably one of the most surprising findings, and I haven't seen this data published anywhere else, is that attendance really matters. So kids who attended more regularly, 90% of the time, which is kind of the marker of what we would call chronic absenteeism, were 2.23 times as likely to be on track compared to children who were chronically absent. So if you want to kind of think about this in real terms is, gosh, a parent who sends their kids regularly has more than 2 times as likely of their chance to be on track for kindergarten. Or in other words, kind of scoring in that 19 or higher range that I mentioned previously. We also looked at income and race-related trends, and again, this is independent of whether or not the kids, well, I'm sorry, let me just speak from the slide. So low-income children with preschool experience were, again, more likely to be on track compared to low-income children without preschool experience. So this, again, points to the benefits of preschool for those who may not have opportunities for enrichment. And then, independent of preschool, African American or Black children with preschool experience were more likely to be on track. And the reason why this is because there are factors that may benefit African American children even when there's not an income differential. For example, we know from the literature that African American children may be less likely to enroll their kids in preschool. So if a parent does enroll them in preschool, they're gonna have those benefits when they get to kindergarten. And we did see that differential impact that was different for African American children that we didn't see actually for white children. And then we did go to 3rd grade with the preschool children, and we did see those benefits differentially for African American children than for white children, even as late as 3rd grade. So for the preschool findings, again, preschool increases children's kindergarten readiness. Attendance was critical for improving kindergarten readiness. And then 2 years versus 1 year benefits children, although 1 year benefits children more than no years. And then preschool experience, there was a differential impact for African American and low income students. So now I want to get to the kindergarten through 12th grade outcomes. For this one, we wanted to just understand the longitudinal achievement for kindergarten through 12th grade and also look at those gender, race, and income impacts. And I can't say enough, I just want to take pause because the data that CPS has is unique to any other district in the country. There's no data, you can go back to Perry Preschool or something like that, but I'm talking about in the current and present time, there is no data being published past kindergarten to 3rd grade. What makes you guys unique is your data infrastructure. There's no school district in Ohio that has the data infrastructure that you have. And the fact that that you guys really started collecting your data in 2005 is what makes this analysis even possible. That being said, again, you can look at this chart again. And one thing I didn't point out previously is the no preschool in preschool. And Vera, you may have interest in this, in looking at the trends back in 2004, where only 22.3% of kids across these 3 cohorts had preschool experience. I know this is something that we've improved upon in the region since that time. So when we look at kindergarten to 3rd grade achievement, you can see these numbers are starting to get bigger now. When you look in comparison with the relationship between kindergarten achievement and 3rd grade achievement, now you're seeing on track 2.54 times as likely to score proficient on the 3rd grade math achievement versus those who are not on track. When you look at that top band, now to be in the top band, you have to have a score of 24, so these are really high achieving students. So those students are 3.65 times as likely to be scoring proficient on the math OAT. Reading, you're seeing similar trends, 2.76 and 3.52 respectively. When you look at kindergarten to 8th grade achievement, similar, 2.12, 2.42 for math, 2.72, 4.12 to reading. Why is reading a little bit stronger? Because the crawl was a literacy test. And then ACT scores, you know, we're talking about a 12-year difference in time between when we were measuring readiness on the crawl and when kids are taking the ACT test, but still predictive for kids. Here's a chart that actually shows the differential between kids who are not on track and on track, and you can see that kids are scoring 4 and 5 points higher for those who are not on track and on track. And then more credits earned. As likely is not as high, but still predictive, statistically significant. High school credits earned, you know, some differential, but differential nonetheless. And as I mentioned, the graduation rates, I think you have the handouts here that just shows graduation rates, 1.14. So that's essentially 14%. All these can be converted to percent, so that's 14%. 14%, it may sound like a small number, but in a district that has nearly 2,000 graduates a year, you know, when you think about 14%, that's, you know, about 200, you know, plus kids a year. That's 200 kids who are either graduating or not graduating that you can track back to potentially kindergarten readiness factors. So in summary of the K-12 findings, students who were on track or who were in band 3, that there were long-term positive effects compared to peers who were not on track. And then there was also a positive relationship for kindergarten readiness in 3rd and 8th grade math and reading. And the relationship between graduation was also notable. And then I just said, you know, future studies could include additional student, family, and academic variables that link all these factors together. So that's really what we learned. And it was a great way, I think, to think about ways that preschool and kindergarten are making a difference. So I'm open to any questions.
Do board members have questions or comments? Ms. Bates?
Yes, have you compared this to the RAND data, or is there a way to do that, and what are you seeing?
From what I've seen from the RAND data, I think it's very similar. I think it's very similar. I'm not sure that, I haven't seen that they've done a longitudinal study like this, but I think it's very similar. I think it's very similar. I haven't seen that they've done a longitudinal study like this. Yes.
Ms. Bolton?
Thank you. This
Yes.
is very helpful. I know that this is important to be able to evaluate, like, say, preschool promise evaluation.
Correct.
How do you do that? Do you do it as a result of the general findings, or are we able to talk about perhaps how the preschool promise has, of course, increased numbers, or how do you kind of make that comparison, or how do you pull it out from the larger picture?
I think that's a really good question. So I think it's an integration. I think when the kindergarten readiness report, or when that analysis is done, I think understanding kids who go to, who are a part of Cincinnati Preschool Promise, how are those kids who are getting tuition assistance and quality improvement, how are those kids also benefiting from preschool is simply a part of that analysis.
If I could ask also, and I know you mentioned the kids that are going to CPS, but we didn't really say versus something else. Mm-hmm. But is there a difference? Does the CPS pool of students, preschool students, tend to be higher than the non-CPS?
So we were a subcontract to the CPP contract last year, And we haven't presented to the board, but one thing I have
Okay,
just
that's
said anecdotally, which is fine, is that in the preliminary analysis, kids who were part of community preschool and part of CPP are very comparable to kids who went to CPS preschool.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, from a curricular standpoint especially, if that was an impact. And then, again, for me anyway, as just one board member, this does make it much more important to not be doing the 300%, and indeed focusing on this pool of children and families that need it the most. Just my own personal view again. Thanks.
Yes,
Hi, Monica, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
I'm okay. With the information, I'm assuming this is all on regular ed students. Any information or data, I don't even know if you probably included this, and it could be included later on, of students affected by trauma that affects their development, any information on the students with disabilities, how they're progressing, even though they may have things that are affecting them to move appropriately through the system regarding testing and crawl and even graduation. Do you have any data on students with disabilities?
That's a really great question. So this is an inclusive evaluation, which means that everyone in the district is included in the sample. What's not included is a breakout, say, of those students. But certainly, I think in the final written report, there can be some recommendations about how, how the analysis or how the next steps could be sensitive to those populations.
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Dr. Mitchell, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your presentation. It's always helpful for us to stay up front and know what's going on out there in the world of evaluation, because that's what drives decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. Does anyone have any kudos? Where's the kudo guy? He missed it. Okay, we're not going back either. Okay, Ms. Bates, please present any retirements that you might have. There he is.
I don't see retirements on the revised recommendations. There was one on an earlier one, but not on the revised.
Maybe there weren't any changes in it, perhaps? So there weren't any changes, so we want to go to the original. Maybe.
Well, don't we use the revised? The person that was retiring is not retiring, is that? Excuse me?
Oh,
Yeah, there was one we had 3 iterations of the superintendent's report, and there was one retirement on the second one. 2 retirements, actually, and then there was none on the third. So, yeah, either that was, they decided to stay. We needed them because we have so many more children, right? We're not letting anybody retire. I guess that's the,
I can double check with Paul McDole as soon as he arrives.
okay, thank you.
okay. So maybe what we can do is come back to that if we need to, but if not, if we don't get to it, let's add it on the next report to make sure that we acknowledge the folks who do retire. Thank you. Okay. We do not have any items for hearing of the public. Okay. Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, you offered the one board matters item. Did you not?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, new policy 7520, long-term lease of school facilities.
I didn't see that draft in our packet. I think the draft policy was supposed to be sent to the packet so we could discuss the draft policy.
Okay, so if what we can do is get a quick copy of that policy, but in the meantime, if you could just sort of give us the gist of the policy as we begin, can you do that? Are you comfortable with that, or you want to wait until the policy gets here?
We've talked about this in prior board matters, so this, thank you. This was just a follow-up to prior conversations in regards to the long-term lease policy.
Okay,
We, in policy, didn't want to make a decision without getting further input from the rest of the board so that we can go back and then finalize the policy with administration and present it for approval at a future meeting.
okay. So let's, Mr. Hoying will go get the policy, a copy of the policy. In the meantime, let's move on to the resolutions, and we can come back to that once the policy arrives. That's okay?
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Bolton,
Yes.
thought you didn't have one. As Chair of the Finance Committee, please present the following resolution for board consideration.
Yes, thank you very much. I am introducing on behalf of the Finance Committee for the whole board's consideration a resolution reappointing audit committee members whose terms we would like to extend, and they are David Foote and Thomas D. Heldman. Thomas D. Heldman, by the way, is a former student of mine. He's a brilliant young man who's not even young anymore. But these are the two we'd like to put forward.
Okay,
Second.
you're presenting it as a motion. Okay, is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion? Mrs. Hughes, please call the roll.
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Ms. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye, thank you. Mr. Davis, you have several resolutions to present, so if you would start with the first one on Board Policy 8476.
Thank you. A resolution adopting a new board policy, whereas the Cincinnati Board of Education reviewed Board Policy 3120.09, volunteers, and Board Policy 4120.09. Volunteers are duplicative policies to be combined and moved to Section 8000, operations, to the district's new board policy 8476, volunteers. And whereas the Cincinnati Board of Education has determined the new board policy 8476, volunteers, is appropriate to be consistent with the current state laws and district procedures. And whereas the new board policy 8476, volunteers, has been reviewed by the administration and the Cincinnati Board of Education Policy Committee, now therefore be it resolved that the Cincinnati Board of Education approves adopting new board policy 8476, volunteers, as written, and be it further resolved that a copy of the Cincinnati Public Schools new board policy 8476, volunteers, will be posted online and be retained on file in the office of the board members, Cincinnati Public Schools Education Center. I present this policy for adoption.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski? President Jones?
Aye. Thank you. Mr. Davis.
A resolution amending Board Policy 5722, school-sponsored publications and productions. I present this as written for adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
I have a,
Yes.
so
Mr.
this
Morowski.
one, I was responsible for bringing this one up, and when I spoke to Mr. Hoying before the last policy committee meeting, I know I'd said that this last line seemed appropriate. I've since changed my mind, and the reason for that is that Hazelwood decision that's cited, I mean, there's a couple problems with it as I see it. One is I certainly would like the students to have more say over their publication. I mean, the chatterbox, as y'all know better than me, particularly those who have been around for a while, was almost like dead, and now it's got like 200 some students in it, and it's a class, and it's largely because the students have the ability to say what they want. The problem with Hazelwood, looking at some other cases, not being an attorney, of course, but looking at other cases is that it opens up us, the administrators of the school, Superintendent Mitchell, et cetera, to be liable, including this language. So while it might seem like a good thing to put in, I just, speaking for myself, would kind of like to revisit it again. I apologize because I know, Mr. Davis, you put this on the agenda because of me, and so we could get it to this point. And, but at the same time, I would like to maybe look at it again, if that's all right.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I withdraw the resolution 5722,
Okay.
and we'll take it back to policy and work with Member
I
Morowski.
appreciate it, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
And I'll try to get some more input than just platitudes, as it were, in some real
Madam Chair?
cases.
Okay. Ms. Bolton?
Could I just add to the discussion? As a person that did performances and what have you, and very interested in newspapers particularly, and writings, like we saw from the Aiken students, my only concern in this is it keeps mentioning the board is doing something.
Yep.
And the reality is the board may sanction, but the board does not decide these things unless it gets to be a critical issue. So in this area, I would really like to see that it is much more the administration that's having something to do with this than the board.
Right, I agree with that. I also wanted to add, just in your review, in the policy, in the new draft of the policy, it's actually on the second face, the front of the second page. In the sentence at the top where it says permission should be given by the principal for advertising in the school newspapers. Then at the bottom, it says the decision as to whether or not something is published or produced shall be made by the advisor with appeal to the principal and superintendent. That was a little vague to me. So it's a matter of semantics, but I think in the policy, we just need to be really clear what we are saying. And I do agree with Ms. Bolton on the board shall do, because we don't do. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for reconsidering.
Let me comment on the last part.
Okay.
The piece on the top was about advertising, and the piece on the bottom is about the overall policy and production, publication and production. That's why there was a difference with the approval.
Okay.
But we will take this back and make sure that both your comments and Member Bolton and Member Morowski's are considered.
So if in fact that's what it was interpreted as, I still would have some concern about permission should. It either is or it isn't, or you know what I'm saying? What is it saying? We encourage it. Sometimes the principal gets to give approval, and sometimes they don't. Under what circumstances? Any of that. So it's just the wording. It's not the context. It's the wording.
I'm with you.
Okay. Mr. Morowski.
And as noted to Mr. Davis and Mr. Hoying, I'll CC you on this. I'll send you some other cases that I think might be a little more relevant or pertinent than Hazelwood.
Thank you. Please do.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Davis, please continue.
A resolution amending Board Policy 6900, School District Records Retention Disposal. I present this policy as written for adoption.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a discussion? Mrs. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye, thank you. Mr. Davis.
A resolution amending Board Policy 8475, criminal background checks for employees, consultants, vendors, and volunteers. I present this policy as written for adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye, thank you. Mr. Davis, last one.
A resolution amending Board Policy 9160, public attendance at school events. I present this policy as written for adoption.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Aye.
Second?
Second.
Okay, discussion? Mrs. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye, thank you. Mrs. Bowers, I believe you have the following resolutions to present.
I have a resolution amending Board Policy 9270, equivalent education outside the school in reference to homeschooling. I'm presenting this policy for adoption as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Mrs. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye, thank you. Ms. Bowers?
I also have a resolution amending Board Policy 9500, relations with educational institutions and organizations. I present this policy for adoption as written.
Is there a second? Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye. Ms. Bowers?
I also have a resolution amending Board Policy 9555, partnerships with business. I am presenting this policy for adoption as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Ms. Hughes? Yes, Ms.
Just-
Bolton?
Just on this, in the community engagement 9,000 series partnership with business, I think, I'm very supportive of it, but it is very, I would say, narrowly defined as to the role that our business partners can play. And I think that that's probably good.
So you're not recommending any changes? You just
Nope,
wanted to
nope,
comment
nope.
on that? Okay.
Nope. But I would say it does represent a change in
Okay,
its
okay.
efforts.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye. Ms. Bowers, please continue.
I have a resolution rescinding Board Policies 3220.09, volunteers, and 4120.09, volunteers. I am presenting this policy for adoption as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye. Ms. Bowers for the last resolution.
Good job, policy.
I am gladly have a resolution rescinding Board Policies 3121, criminal history record check, and 4121, criminal history record check. I present this policy for adoption as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Morowski?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye. Okay, we made it through resolutions. Thank you all. So we're going to go back to board matters. Mr. Hoyne did bring forward the policy regarding the proposed long-term lease policy, and just an apology that we didn't well, we'll address that later because it really should have been in the packet for us, because now we haven't had a chance to review it. But Mr. Davis, if you want to go ahead and bring the discussion forward, that would be great. You did a little bit of that before.
Well, that's fine. No, we wanted to bring this to the board because we know it's sensitive in regards to how we move forward with our partners and the use of our facilities long-term. So I think one of the conversations we were having in policy was to get the board's feel about where we go with different sizes of organizations, where we go with how long in this proposal it is suggested after a year you come back to the board for approval longer than a year. And then there was a in-depth conversation in regards to cost of services and those services that our partners are providing.
Okay. Ms. Spates?
Yeah, I do think this needs further review. I think it's kind of confusing because the way I read it is that we have to offer first to community schools, college prep boarding schools, et cetera. But if there's, say, at Gamble Montessori High School, there's a part of the school that we wish to lease to another entity, does it have to first be, offered to charter schools and so forth? If we really want a health center there or another partner there, or does this only pertain to entire full facility buildings? That's really unclear because, we are leasing property to other entities and not offering them to charter schools now if our school is the main focus of that facility.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Go ahead, Ms. Bolton.
I think that's an important point. If you look at the campus, let's just say of Gamble High School, there are other facilities or structures on that campus. My understanding, though, is that we may use them for our purposes without offering them elsewhere if we own it, but I don't think that's clear in this.
It's not.
And so, from that standpoint, too, I know that when this first came up, and I appreciate Chairman Davis's point on this of describing it the first time we kind of talked about this, there was somewhat of a panic by our community learning center partners, and most particularly our school-based health folks, who were saying, wait a minute, does that pertain to us? So I think that we have to be very clear what it pertains to and what it doesn't pertain to. And the leasing piece, it's educational to me to know that that law about offering to community schools about sale, which we've all had to go through at great cost to us, and in our growth, not having the facilities we could have and should have been able to keep. I need to know what unused means, and I need to know what the real, if this is specific, obviously, to leasing. Do we have another policy that's about sale of property?
Yes.
Probably, so that same kind of language is there, where the state legislature, the law, whatever, requires that we subsidize charter schools with public money. But that's unclear to me. If we can clear some of that up, especially if it's our facilities, and what do they mean by use? So I do recall years ago we had to make sure we used it at least for storage and keep something happening there. So that would be great to know a little bit more about that.
Yes. Ms. Bolton?
Ms. Bates?
I'm sorry, Ms. Bates. I always get the Bolton and
It
Bates
starts with
mixed
the
up.
because we look so much
I'm
alike.
sorry. I'm looking right at her.
She's been gone so long.
I know. She's been in de France. Okay.
So and what is also unclear, if there is a current facility that is not being used for educational purposes, say Iowa Street, and we want to sell that, if it's not being used currently for educational purposes, does it still fall under all of these laws?
Yes, I hear you. That's exactly what I wrote down. I think as we're looking at better defining this lease, I believe we had a previous conversation about property, perhaps looking at doing an assessment of all of our buildings in that text. So we might want to look at both policies and then ask administration to expand that look to include this particular policy as well.
I will say that the administration was really great about getting the assignment regarding the enrollment lists for us and capacity or
Okay.
not capacity. That was helpful. But they will also have to do, as we move forward, the physical, both of the building and square footage and what have you, but also the property that surrounds it. Because does this pertain to land? I mean, we're looking at possibly providing parking during FC games, and do we sublease a parking lot out to people to run the parking lot at Hayes Porter during FC games, or what? Just if we maybe need to know more. You all probably know all that stuff, but I don't. So I'm interested in knowing that.
Okay, so if I'm hearing correctly, what we want to do is send this back to policy for further review and to include the other piece of that, which was the policy relating to sale as well. Maybe look at them simultaneously and try to make some of those clarifications for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mr. Morosky?
Real quick, and it also sounds like, Board Member Bolton, I agree with offering some specificity to some of these words, particularly unused. I also wonder if it might be worthwhile considering backing off some of the specificity in the opening paragraph, particularly about who specifically will offer below market rents to. Just something to consider, and maybe Part 5, Section A, and maybe just looking at more broader language. Just consider.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Davis, does that help you move forward?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Appreciate it, board members.
Thank you. All righty, moving on. Superintendent Mitchell, do you have a report?
I do. And I'm just going to wait for the remote.
Oh, good.
So today I would like to present an update to the transportation conversation that took place last week and is continuing. Since last week, we have set up a transportation command center in my conference room, as well as a call center in the superintendent's suite that currently has 7 people working in that call center. 2 of those people are from First Student, so we're thankful that First Student they've agreed to allow some of their people to come to CPS for the last couple of weeks, last week and this week, to be able to help us. So we transport 40,000 kids a day, which is more obviously than our enrollment. And so when you factor in the charter kids, the parochial kids, as well as the private kids, it ends up being roughly 40,000 kids. We run approximately 1,500 bus routes each morning. Of those routes, approximately 800 are CPS bus routes. This is a timeline of the work that we built out, and I'm going to pass one around to you so that you can see, and for the audience benefit, I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We really wanted to be able to lay out what needs to happen every single month in order to make sure that our buses are rolling on time and that we know where our kids are. So in the month of August, I'm going to start with the process in August, but technically, really, the process starts in June. But then I'll take it forward to June. So in August is when some of the enrollments start for neighborhood schools and for non-public. Once those enrollments take place, were there enough for everyone? Okay, I'm sorry. Once those enrollments take place, then the routing has to take place, but that takes a 2-week time period. So the first routing begins in August, and then bus cards are issued. Then there's the processing of address changes, deviated stops, change in stops, students who are experiencing homelessness, students with disabilities, and students who are in foster care. So all of these things have to be factored in when you consider transportation. Students are then added to existing routes. Then there's a reroute that takes place. So there was a reroute that took place on 8/29, which was effective yesterday. We processed last week 17,000 reroutes. Of the 17,000, 10,000 of them were CPS. And so last week, we are pulling together a very large team of people. The transportation team printed all of the cards for the reroutes for CPS, and we had a large team who packaged all of those up, and then another large team who took those out, hand-carried those out to schools so that parents would have them before the reroutes took place on Tuesday morning, which was yesterday. Those reroutes, those cards were also put in the mail as well. And the information was uploaded in PowerSchool. So there were 3 different ways in which a CPS parent could get the information. From the youngster bringing it home in a backpack, it being mailed to their home, and then also looking on PowerSchool. The call center has been logging parent calls and answering questions regarding routes and identifying where buses are. So that's what our call center is currently doing. We each morning go on to the call center line, including the clerical staff for the leadership team, and pull off the messages and log how many messages there were and how many we're actually processing every single day. In September, the reroutes take place every week. So on past Monday, which was Labor Day, our reroute started again based upon change of address, deviated address, change of stop, homelessness, students with disabilities, and foster care. So this is happening nonstop and constantly. The reroutes that were processed on the 3rd will be in effect on Monday. So it takes place, the reroute takes place on Monday, and then it's effective the following Monday. Reroutes will be taking place on a weekly basis until the first week of October, the first full week of October. And then in October, when our student count, when we take our student count, then the reroutes will be bi-weekly rerouting. And then that process will take place through the months of November and December. And then in January, weekly reroutes start all over again. So you can see that you really have to have a very sophisticated system to handle a very complex transportation concern or issue. However, it is not rocket science, and it's really about putting processes and structures in place to be able to manage the work, although it is complex. In February, there are bi-weekly reroutes that then begin, as well as in March, and then in April, summer school routing begins. And then in May, summer school extended routing or extended school routing begins for students with disabilities, and summer school routing continues. Then in June, we receive information from planning and PowerSchool to identify the students who are enrolling for the upcoming school year, and the rollover takes place to identify those kids who are moving up to a new grade and also moving up into new schools. And then summer school transportation is taking place in the month of June. And then in July, we receive additional information for planning and PowerSchool and continue the student rollover. And then routing begins and enrollments continue. For this upcoming school year, we've already planned. So when I say upcoming school year, I'm already into the 2020-21. This summer, we will be conducting audits to look at who got transportation this year, who maybe isn't scheduled for transportation next year. And so we'll have a series of audits that we'll be able to pull so that we can make sure that our kids are on a route and ready for the opening of school. So that's just a brief overview of the timeline. Over the last week, since last week, we have worked on 3 different process maps to be able to process map all of this out. So it's really about organization, but then quite honestly, even with the best planning organization, you're still going to have incidences that take place. So let me give you one really quick incident before I even go into the process map. So for example, yesterday, at the end of the school day, there was a shooting incident that took place in Avondale, which means that South Avondale School had to be put on lockdown, which means the kids could not leave the building to enter the buses. South Avondale is coupled with Sand School, which is a late school. So because those buses were late pulling out of South Avondale, because of a situation that was totally out of anyone's control, it means that the Sands buses are late. So there's always a ripple effect, and in many instances, it is not controllable. However, one thing that our Chief Communication Officer has taught me, what is controllable is our response and communication. And so that's what we're really working on. So with the assistance of Sarah Trimble Oliver, and she is a master of systems thinking, she put together a transportation hotline where you can see how we can log in all new calls. And so she has sorted them by high priority, medium priority, low priority, and things that can take place later. And we're tracking every single day how many of those we've been able to turn around and process that are coming in through our call center. So you can see that we have subs who are coming in. We take the information off of voicemail. We then indicate the category of that issue from a parent. It then goes to either Tier 1 or Tier 2 strategy. And so we have people who can do Tier 1 work, which is be able to collect information. Tier 2 requires a different skill set, so then there's a handoff to a person who can handle the Tier 2 calls. Transportation walk-ins. So we also have parents who walk in. So they've registered their child in the customer care center, and now they are looking for transportation. So someone from transportation now comes down and is able to handle those walk-ins immediately. But immediately doesn't mean they're going to be on a bus tomorrow, because you have to factor all of that into the rerouting system. So although this has been painful, I know a lot more about transportation probably than I ever wanted to know, but it's actually really good information to know. So a parent comes into the care center, their need is identified. Pam Williams is the contact person who will handle those situations, and then the rerouting begins. So it means that either we have to see if we can put that, first of all, identify if that person's eligible for transportation, and then identify what route they would be on, and then the time of that. So that takes a little bit of time. So these things cannot take place overnight. But we're trying to make it as efficient as possible and move as quickly as possible without making grave mistakes. Then there's a backlog process. So for all of those emails and phone calls that have come in that we haven't been processed through our current system with the call center or through our rerouting, then we have a process for that as well. And so yesterday, at the end of the day, I counted that from the time we set up the call center last week, which was last Wednesday, until yesterday evening, we had processed 330 parent requests. That's in addition to the 10,000 reroutes. So we have a process for that as well. And so we look at and identify whether it's Tier 1 or Tier 2. We identify what the issue is, and then we route it to either a Tier 1 person, Tier 2 person, or Tier 3. And so you can see that Tier 1 are people who can answer phones and then take down the information. Tier 2 are for people who can actually go into the system and make changes or identify where a bus is. And then Tier 3 go to our administrators, either Pam Williams or Lauren Johnson. And those tiers that we have at the very bottom are for crisis. And so, quite honestly, we took very seriously the concerns that we received from parents last week. We did phone calls. I personally called and talked with families, Lauren Johnson, as well as Pam Williams, to try to resolve issues as quickly as possible. Okay, so this speaks to the rerouting that I talked about, which is on the timeline. In terms of the very first reroute really took place the 21st, effective the 26th. The second reroute was the 29th, effective yesterday, and you can see how many reroutes were processed at that time. And then there are weekly reroutes until the first full week of October. And so as we think about our work with our process flow and our process maps, now we're focused on what are the most critical things that we have to be able to do and make sure that we have them in the right order and sequence. And so the state reporting that had to be completed was signed off on and completed on this past Friday. We processed and problem solved the concerns that came from parents at the board meeting last week. We notified parents of the reroute information. We'll continue to notify parents of that. We are also continuing to work on being able to identify the location of buses so that parents can be relieved as to knowing where their kids were. And so those are things we're continuing to work on. We now have a daily report. I love getting these reports, red, yellow, green, for each school by route, AM and PM, so that we can look to see at the beginning of the week where the bus was in terms of being on time, and did it get better, did it get worse? And so we're able to look at that data, and then Lauren Johnson is having conversations with the vendors regarding that information. So there are a couple of vendors who do not have this system, this on-screen system or capability on their vehicles, and so that accounts for about 1,000 CPS students. But we should be able to track the other kids. The other thing that we're working on is making sure that we can process as quickly as possible the parent calls that are coming into the call center right now and the ones that we're still working on processing. Some of the calls that we have in our stacks, quite honestly, we believe have been processed through the reroutes, but we are double checking and making sure that we're capturing all kids. We'll be working to continue to expand a call center. We need to make sure that we can stagger the times so that we have someone who is available to take calls from 6:04 a.m., which is when the first bus pulls out, to 6 p.m. And so we believe that, quite honestly, it will be crucial and necessary for CPS to have its own call center. That is the way that we, at this point, can be assured that we have the information for parents. Again, I do want to thank First Student Ken Jones, who has sent 2 of his staff members over to work in our call center, and they have been absolutely delightful on the phone as they've been working with parents. We're going to continue looking at our process maps and looking for holes and gaps in areas that we can improve. And then again, I mentioned in the timeline that we'll be running audit reports so that we can be as efficient and effective as possible providing service to our families. And so that is a transportation update. Thank you.
Superintendent Mitchell, are you presenting this as your full report? You completed the report?
I am.
Okay, so is there a motion? Is this a motion to approve, Superintendent?
No.
No.
So I'm sorry. This is
Report.
just a part of my board meeting update or superintendent's report, in addition to my printed report, which are
Okay,
about
gotcha,
personnel.
your revised report. Thank you. Is there a second?
No.
No, there's not a
There's no
first.
motion.
There's no motion.
I
Laura-
just asked for a motion.
Laura
And
can
so,
make a motion.
Yeah, hold on.
So moved.
Superintendent, is this a motion to approve the report?
So this is the completion of my report on the transportation
Okay.
situation that we encountered next week, and now I present my written report regarding personnel.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now, is there a second?
No.
It has to be a motion. I move.
She moved.
Second.
Can I?
I'm
just-
sorry.
Point
I'm-
of clarification.
Yes,
The superintendent does a report, but this is not what we're voting on.
that's right.
So we
You're
don't
you're
need a-
right, you're right.
Does-
My mistake.
I always make that
Somebody needs
mistake,
to
just-
make a motion. Who moved? Thank you. Is there a second?
What, are we not going to have any opportunity to speak with the superintendent after her report?
In discussion? Am I confused?
Yes.
Okay, what am I
No,
confused
we
about?
moved the report, and then we have the discussion, because this was part of her
No,
report.
we do not.
Hold
move.
on.
It's all right. We can do
Okay.
whatever we want, but we don't.
Superintendent,
move the
are you
report.
completed with your report? Is your report complete?
Yes, I have completed my update on transportation.
Which completes your report, the full report. Her report was, okay. So Ms.
We
Williams,
move
what
on
is your point?
recommendations. We don't move on the
I
superintendent's report.
just asked for a motion on her recommendations, and then we'll open it, get a second and open for discussion.
Okay.
Am I right?
But we're going to have
Okay.
discussion about her report.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Did someone second? I did hear a second, Mr. Morosky, I believe you, did you?
No.
Okay,
I
will
move-
you please second?
I moved, I can't second.
No,
Will
I
you
moved.
move? Oh,
Okay, then I'll
fine.
second.
It's been moved and second that we approve the recommendations of the superintendent's revised reports. Any discussion?
Yes,
Ms. Bolton?
and my discussion is about the wonderful report that the superintendent just gave us about transportation.
Thank you.
And I have a number of questions and comments. And first of all, I applaud the all hands on deck that the superintendent put together during this time. I also want to make sure that the public knows that transportation has been broken for a number of years. And the transition into fixing things is not just a matter of implementing an annual plan like we've been doing, that this has been a redo, a restart, a reset, a refresh. And so, of course, it was more difficult than in the past. But I'm encouraged about the call center command. I'm encouraged about the fact that we have to fully staff our efforts. I have confidence in is it Ken Jones, or Ken from First Student? And I just have a couple of quick questions. I've been told a number of times by the media that there are technological things that the law doesn't allow us to use. Are we familiar with that, or is that something that's been a legend that's grown up? If we don't know that today, it's just if we can know it later.
So, Lauren, can you speak to that? Okay, thank you.
Is it
And
just-
Dan Hoying?
That's like, may I ask just a follow-up question?
Sure.
You mean like a GPS
The
type
GPS,
system?
are we allowed to use particular technologies? I mean, I know years ago, we talked about the kids having on their backpacks little things that could trace them and follow them. But at least 3 different media folks have said there's something about the law that prevents us from using all the technology that's available. I didn't know if the media was right and if I was less informed.
So right now, we can track the buses. We are not tracking kids on a bus, but we can tell the location of a bus and how far they're away from a particular school.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
So the law is really what technology deals with what's on the vehicle itself and making sure that doesn't inhibit the driver's ability to operate that vehicle safely. And so one of those technologies were around tablets on vehicles. And so the state has since improved that, and now we work with your local highway patrol officer to identify where those devices could be implemented inside the vehicle. Now that will help with turn-by-turn GPS for sub-drivers. It will also help with student tracking. There's modules that can be built in addition to that can help with that. And so there is technology out there. I know some of our vendors, such as First Student and National Express, also are testing those technologies before we bring them in to our district. We want to vet it out, make sure it's working efficiently, because we don't have the luxury to have to fail. So we want to make sure we test it out first and foremost before we bring any of that technology into our systems.
Great, so that answers what, at least where the media was coming from, that you couldn't have some of this GPS stuff on the bus or whatever, but you've answered that. If I could also, as we have changed bus stops, I know that annually the board approves the bus stops. As those bus stops get changed, I mean, every year we ask, as the security look to see if those are safe, can we, have updated lists so that we're able to, I don't want lists, but if there are changes, I think we're required to say yes to it, and I'm sure we would. And I know for at least 10 years, I always ask, has security checked to see if the bus stops are
Yes, so
safe?
the bus stops have not yet been approved by the board, but we can, now that we have a massive reroute completed, then we can bring that forward. I will say that we tag every single of the parent concerns in order of priority, and those that have anything regarding safety, we handle those like immediately. So if it's the student is having to cross a street or walk through a particular area, we're trying to handle those as quickly as possible. So like we're really like going through them, reading them, and tagging them, and putting them into priority piles.
That's great. Also, I know last year with Mr. Johnson's help, the internal auditor did a study of the transportation department, and would like to see, I'm sure you're implementing some of those recommendations that were very well presented to the audit committee just at the end of last year, if I recall. And the final thing is, did we find out a little bit about how parents communicate? I mean, we have it on Power School. What's the percentage of our parents that are on Power School and can access? Because that's one of the things I've heard, that many of them are not.
Yeah.
And that's part of the issue of communication as well.
Sarah, do you know approximately the percentage of parents who are on and using Power School? 30%. About 30%.
That's a problem. But no, I applaud the fix. I would the work that everybody's doing. But I do think the community needs to know this was a huge thing.
Yeah.
But more particularly, there needs to be language change, like all this rerouting that we're doing. You might want to call it adjustments, because some of that stuff is very normal. It's not like everything is changing. Everybody's thinking everything's changing every day. And I think it just creates some additional whatever. And I don't think it would be a bad idea for the superintendent to, in one of your wonderful quasi-TED Talk sort of things, not with all this specificity, but start to explain it if people could access it on the web. I think it's very reassuring to hear about the process and what you're doing about it.
Yes. So a reroute doesn't mean that everything is changing, to your point, but if you add a student who wasn't on a bus, if you add that stop, then that requires a reroute. And so all those things happen when new kids enroll or when people ask for changes, deviated stops, changing address. And so you're absolutely right. It doesn't mean that the entire system is changing, but some change has to be made to accommodate the student.
And I think some language issues there could be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
No. Are you done? I'm sorry, I wasn't.
I'm done.
You done? Okay. Ms. Bates.
I think Mike was first, but it doesn't matter.
Mr. Morosky.
Okay, I know there was an increase in the students who are impractical to transport, and they received a letter that pretty much said, we don't have to transport you, whatever. Going back to resolutions, we have a board policy, relations with educational institutions and organizations. Were only the parents notified? Was the school notified? Have we had conversations with the Archdiocese or any of the, there was a private school that was involved? Because certainly we want to maintain good relationships with our partner institutions out in the community. And lest I remind everyone at the table, this is a levy year, one of 3 out of the next 4 years, and it's very important to maintain these relationships. So my question back to the original point, what is the communication with these institutions about the changes?
Right, so we had, last year, I did a town hall meeting with the Archdiocese, with all the school administrators. They came out to St. Boniface, that was last April. There was also correspondence that went out to Longitudinal, giving them an update of that information. I also have weekly calls now with Mary Ann Holmes of the Archdiocese every Thursday, 8 o'clock in the morning, and where I'm providing her an update on transportation matters pertaining to the Archdiocese schools. When it comes to the charter schools, we interact with them on a day-by-day, case-by-case basis regarding issues with their school and their transportation matters.
So it's my understanding, so I know there was a particular situation in which I returned a phone call for a parent that it was deemed impractical to transport her child to school. And so there is communication. There's actually a letter that goes out, and it's my understanding that that letter goes out the second week of September that really talks about the impracticality of it, as well as the option for reimbursement for transporting kids. Is that correct?
That is correct. And part of my correspondence with all the schools trying
Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Jones. I really appreciate this timeline, Superintendent, and Mr. Johnson. I know how hard you've been working. I know overtime doesn't come close to describing it. I also appreciate the clarity that you just provided with the non-public students and the charter students, because that's a really important distinction that I don't know a lot of people know. And again, I think you hit the nail on the head that there might be some over-promising going on. So I appreciate that and noting that. So I have a whole lot of questions. I won't ask all of them. And while I appreciate all of the examples, the SANS examples stuck out to me profoundly because there are some students who haven't been on time to school one day. So while that one example, I appreciate it very much, and I understand how all these dots sort of connect, being raised by a guy, logistics professional of 50 years, I know how difficult it is, but there are still kids who are not getting to school on time. And while I wish I shared the faith that my colleague, Board Member Bolton, has in all of this getting worked out, I have to say, even only being here 2 years, I'm hesitant. I don't know at what point you look at other vendors. I don't know at what point you start leveraging the power we have through our purchasing power to make changes. I said this last year many times. I said it at the transportation matrix many times. I'm not necessarily even talking about getting rid of vendors, but I'm talking about bringing on other people to help with the load, and there are other people. To that point, this is great. I'm just curious how this happened on this level. And I know we're taking steps to not have it happen again next year. Is there anything you can pinpoint? I mean, this is nice, but is there anything you can pinpoint? How did this happen? Because it's a mess. And I know it was a mess before you got here. I'm not putting this on you. We said this at the end of last school year. But this has been poor. Fights on buses, unreported fights, people using paper logs. I understand that everyone has GPS, but this is ridiculous. And so how did this get so terrible?
Well, I kind of want to speak to a couple of things that we didn't do last year and years past. We did do a readiness audit prior to the start of the school year in July, where we looked at our big major vendors, first to Cincinnati, make sure their operations was ready to handle our demand. Unfortunately, after that readiness audit, National Express, Queen City, lost 44 drivers in less than 30 days. That compounded over to them notifying me 5 days before the first day of school that they weren't able to service 14 routes. Those 14 routes will account to over 1,000 students not having transportation on the first day of school. It was because of first student being able to step up, and then I maxed out all of their resources to compensate for that shortage. In addition, another vendor, UTS, came on board and started offering yellow bus service to help balance that load. So quite honestly, it was a breakdown of communication. And that communication happened when we were notified that they couldn't service those routes. And when they couldn't service those routes, I couldn't send out those cards because I did not want a student on the first day of school be standing out there looking for a bus that did not show up. And so I made sure my team worked very hard in 2 days to correct that issue and get those routes reallocated into other existing routes so we can make sure that we had buses for every single student that we had being eligible to receive transportation on that first day of school. That was a trickle down effect that started at that point. From there, we have been playing catch up. First student, I can't say enough, they have done a lot to step up to the plate and overcompensate for what other vendors have been short. But as we saw earlier through Laura Worley's presentation, we are an increasing growing district. With that being said, our demand on our resources, which is a fixed amount of resources, we have a fixed amount of drivers in the region, fixed amount of vehicles in the region. We're going to hit a point where it's going to teeter one way or other. And so we need to really be aggressive about what we're doing and looking at year 2021. We are having an RFI go out to all vendors, both locally and nationally in September. Our RFQ will
That's awesome to hear. That's the most encouraging thing, actually, I've heard in a year and a half on this board regarding transportation. And also thanks to First June for stepping up when the drivers weren't there. I'm not going to pat on the back too much, though, because things are still pretty bad. And if somebody needs to be a jerk, it'll be me, I guess. We need to get better at this. And we need to, I know we're doing it as quickly as we can, but it needs to happen even quicker than that. Lastly, I'm not willing to complain and not put an onus on myself. This is our fault, too. We approve things up here. We vote on things. And something Mr. Davis has brought up, and Ms. Bolton as well, in student achievement that I'd like to end with, and I'm going to give an assignment when this is all said and done. I think there are numerous non-transportation items we could look at to help you do your job better and more efficiently. And one such thing is looking at boundaries of schools, particularly high schools. And I'll make an assignment later on for one of Ms. Bolton's favorite things in the world. She'll be very happy. I want a dot map about high schools. And, you know, with the growth of the district, it's time we had to come to whatever it is you believe in, fill in the blank moment about this, because I think some of that too, I don't want to, you know more about this than I do, but I know we're sending folks all over the place. And I think there are things we can do that maybe aren't transportation related, that maybe are more in our wheelhouse that could assist. So I just want to offer that too. I'm not willing to just complain and not try to be part of the solution. So I think that's something we could look at in SAC.
Is it okay if I address a couple
Yes,
of the
Superintendent.
concerns? So you asked a very pointed question, what happened? So I want to be very transparent. We needed to tighten up some systems in terms of processes, quite honestly, and having enough people on staff to be able to process the work as quickly as possible. The transportation department is down 3 people. That's not an excuse, it is a fact. We have called in someone who retired from transportation last year, who came back today to offer some assistance. We did not initially have a central communications center here at central office. The vendors have them within their departments at their locations, but I think that there's some value of us having it here. Before school began, Paul McDole orchestrated one here to take parent concerns down in 1A, and then we discontinued it. We since then put that back in place, and Paul was able to find some clerical to come in to be able to answer those calls. To be quite honest with you, and just to be transparent, in terms of the emails that were sent out, that was done quite honestly as an attempt to correct a problem that took place prior. So the bus cards were not mailed home on the day that they were scheduled to be mailed home. And so leadership teams sat around the table to try to problem solve this as quickly as possible. And one of our colleagues, in all good intent, came up with the idea, which made a lot of sense, of for those parents that we have email addresses for, let's email them the information so that they have it, because the cards are probably not going to make it on time. And so in that haste of moving so quickly to correct another problem, a bug was not detected, which led to that issue. So quite honestly, it was people trying to work very quickly to correct another problem. Had the cards gone out on time, we would have not sent out the emails. That is being transparent and honest.
I just want to thank the superintendent and Mr. Johnson for being so transparent and honest. I think it's important for folks to hear that and to see that when we're willing to own it. And I myself am also willing to own our part in it as well. So however we can help going forward, again, this is really encouraging. And again, to repeat, I think there are things we may be able to do to assist that may not be as transportation focused.
Okay. Mr. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Superintendent Mitchell. The readiness audits, do they include actual testing of the routes? Do the buses actually go out? The question I've gotten a lot of is, do we do a pre-test with buses on routes before school starts?
So the readiness audit is more so of their operation, staffing levels, equipment, school buses. Now, in our contract agreements with all our vendors,
And I might be to ask this question offline, but is there a scenario where a parent should be told that her children won't have bus service until the end of September? I'm speaking of Camille White.
Maybe we could take this one offline and work through. We'll be happy to do that.
Okay, it didn't make sense when I got the text, so I wanted to ask it. And then, like I said, I could take it offline. My last question is kind of going back to Ms. Worley's presentation. So with the amount of buses and transportation that we have with charter and parochial students, are we doing any recruiting of those students on the buses?
Yeah, add that.
We are not. I can answer that question.
Is this all a ploy?
Can we put Mr. Davis on one of the buses?
I'm just thinking 800 routes, that's a lot of routes. A lot of potential for students to come into the district. Thank you, Mr. Johnson and Ms. Mitchell.
Ms. Bolton?
Yes, just as a follow-up to what Mr. Morosky was saying, I think and the superintendent talking about processes, we are in a growth sprint. And we didn't have the processes in place to absorb that growth, let alone necessarily anticipate this is going to be an ongoing experience. There will be 40,000 kids here by the end of this strategic plan. I will guarantee it. So my reality is what Mr. Morosky has said, we might have to accelerate the issues regarding the meridian and the neighborhood boundary lines and what's the mix of neighborhood high schools versus specific curricular high schools. And I think that's the charge to the board and to the leadership team to figure that out, as well as we're going to have to accelerate the public engagement that might involve. But the reality also is some of that's not going to be public engagement. It's going to be the necessity of running the district. So I think we have plenty of work to do, just like you all, and I do have confidence that this is going to get worked through, but we did lose a lot of support with this one, and we do have to work to get it back. Thank you.
So, last comment, very light. All board members get lots of inquiries, questions, emails, you know this. It's kind of nice to start to see a few emails coming in that says, thank you for resolving the situation with my child.
Yes.
And so we are starting to get those. And I don't want to be remiss in saying that we appreciate that. And I also wanted to remark, because we have one of our vendors here. Monday, when I was down at Coney Island, a young lady approached me because she heard somebody introduce me as the president of the board. And she walked right up to me. I don't remember her name, but she was a driver for First Student. And she looked at me and said, I love my job. I've been with this company for 17 years. I take my job very seriously. And we want this to work. I said, we do too. And we hugged, and we moved on and had a good time and ate hot dogs, okay? So all is not lost, and I appreciate that. And we do have issues. We will get them resolved. We will. Thank you so much.
Do you mind, President Jones, if I thank Sarah Trimble Oliver has been a master at working through a lot of situations, and so I just really want to acknowledge her for the work and the systems that she's put in place, in addition to all of leadership team and their clerical. So we had a handoff system where we were packaging cards, handing off to another person who was a runner out to the school, and so like the entire Ed Center was rallied around us, and so I just really want to thank all the people who were involved in making that happen. It was an all-out effort. I also want to thank our principals who got the information to our kids quickly, and to our parents. It would be remiss not to mention all the people who actually helped in this process.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, final comment?
I have a comment outside of the transportation report.
Okay.
I just want to thank and Dan's not even in here, but as a matter of record, Dan is in here. As a matter of record, I just want to thank Miss Ashley Adu for her service. We're going to miss her at transportation. And,
Go ahead.
sorry?
Nothing.
No, I'm sure, yeah, we're not transportation policy.
Policy, yeah.
You're just taking over my mind, Mr. Johnson. We're going to miss her in policy, and I know Dan's going to miss her as well. So as a matter of record, I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned Miss Adu on her last couple of days with the district.
Thank you. I think we all concur with that. If you haven't, yes, we can apply. Okay, so we're going to move on, and let me apologize for my snafu in process. And then but anyway, we're going to go ahead. It's been moved and seconded to approve the revised recommendations of the superintendent. Mrs. Hughes, please call the roll.
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the revised report of the treasurer?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion? Ms. Hughes, please call the roll.
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. Okay, inquiries and updates. I have several, but board members, defer to you if anybody has inquiries and updates. Ms. Bolton?
I have one in particular to update the board, because I think the board needs to know about this so that we can reimburse some payment regarding Columbus work. As some of you know, we've been working very hard as a district for some time to work through the reform of the Ohio report card. And came not close, but at least made some progress last year and the year before. And now this year, the state legislature and ODE have appointed and put together a ad hoc committee on that is both manned by the Ohio Senate and manned by the Ohio House. And that ad hoc committee is being staffed, and that ad hoc committee has leadership from both the House and the Senate. And the effort is to come up with recommendations by the end of this calendar year to be able to put forward either those recommendations and implement them either the following school year or the school year after that. Here, the reality is that one of the groups that Cincinnati Public helped create, which is the Urban Network, which is recognizing that there are more than the great 8 big urban districts, but there are probably closer to 70 more urban districts in the state of Ohio. The Urban Network has convened a committee of its districts, and Cincinnati, of course, is one of those that will be meeting in 2 weeks in Columbus to put together a consensus report from the urbans, even the ones that we don't think of urbans, even though Winton Woods, for example, is counted as an urban now in this new configuration. And those recommendations are going to be put together as a matter of consensus and then sent to that ad hoc committee. Quickly, one of the new developments, unfortunately, is that Mr. Terhar, who was going to be one of the co-chairs of that committee, has now announced his resignation due to personal reasons. And so they're in the process of finding out who that would be. The interesting thing about Mr. Terhar is that he actually understood the invalidity, if you will, of value added. So he was going to be a good champion for us. We hope they can find somebody like that. But I'm pleased to say that they want Cincinnati's report that Cincinnati put together and any additional information that Cincinnati has about how to reform the report card, and I will take that to that meeting, and I just need the approval, if possible, of the board that this is within my parameters as being a representative to the urban network. But I'm semi-hopeful, as are our lobbyists, hopeful about what this committee can do. And so we're excited, and again, it's a place where we've been pressuring and advocating, and particularly by the superintendent, that we could actually get some results that would be beneficial to CPS.
Ms. Bates?
I would agree that you should bring that to that body, but I would request that the board see what you're bringing before you bring it to that body, and
Yes.
not just take direction from the administration.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why I didn't say necessarily a new report, but the one that was developed last year, I believe, could be resurfaced, and any additional should absolutely come before the board. It's from, even down here in the Southwest, it's Cincinnati Public all the way to the smallest district in Hamilton County, Laughlin, and of course our great colleagues at Winton Woods. And the people up in Toledo are leading very, very forcefully. So it's a great opportunity. We have more power together.
Ms. Bowers? This is not in reference to board member. Okay, let me close this out. So thank you for that update. If the board is comfortable with her in that role, we can move on. You okay? Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Except Morosky, he's a little worried.
Okay, Ms. Bowers?
I just have an inquiry, and I don't know if this is an assignment or not, but I have concerns about students, in addition to coming to school late on the bus, but coming to school late in general, be it bus transportation or they're just late getting to school per driving by parent. If they are able to receive breakfast, and I don't think that that's happening across the district from high school, primary schools, grades, what have you. I don't think that's happening. I don't know why that's not happening if our schools are 100% free breakfast. And we know that if students are not eating, that they're not really in the mindset to learn, especially if they're hungry and haven't eaten. So I don't know if that's an assignment or it's just an inquiry, if we can find out.
Ms. Bates?
And just to add to that, my grandson received his little card, and it says that his pickup is at 7:20. Well, school starts at 35, I think, at North Avondale. So even the kids on that bus are going to be late for breakfast. And that was a question my daughter had. What happens to these children? Do they get breakfast if they're even on time but late for breakfast?
And I do know that that's not happening across the district at particular schools. It's being relinquished from the student for whatever reason, but.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we need to make that an assignment. I see the superintendent shaking her head, so maybe administration can give us a report on that piece. Okay, any others before I do? Okay. Real simple. Our CPS, CPP collaborative meeting is definitely confirmed for October 10th. They do not have the capability of live streaming, so Vera is waiting on us to see if we wanted to do it here. If everybody's okay with that, we'll do it here. I am still recommending, however, that they host it. We don't have to host every single meeting. I think they can host it as well here. Oh, gosh. Vera's not here. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll let you know. It's an evening meeting. It's going to be an evening meeting, yes. It's going to be an evening.
I will not be in attendance. I'll be in Columbus. But that's okay. I mean,
Okay.
I have
Okay.
confidence in everybody.
And Ms. Bates, are you out of town? We'll work it out.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'll just adjust. It's a personal, a family thing, so
Okay.
I think I can work it out.
Okay, I just wanted people to get that on their calendars. Okay, second thing on the agenda is did you all receive a copy of Mayor Cranley's response? We said this last time, we don't want to keep writing letters. we're not going to write another letter. But Daniel, I don't know, I think at the last board meeting, we asked that we nail down some dates, and his letter said that they were going to reach out. So can you just give us a brief update on what's going on with that? He also offered to meet with us personally, or me, I don't know what he wants to do, but anyway.
We still don't have dates. The day that we sent the letter, we called the legal office, who is, has been our contact, Paula Boggs-Muthing and Luke Blocher, and it gave them specifically the dates that were in our letter as opportunities for us to meet, Ms. Wagner and I, and did not hear back. We actually didn't get the letter from the mayor. I think it was published in the media before we actually received a copy of it. But it does say, I think, as I saw it, that he is directing his administration also to meet with us. So it should be imminent that we have dates for further discussion.
My thought about that is just to call his office directly and say, let's just nail it down now and get a date and let's just do this. The back and forth thing is really, irritating to me. Ms. Bates?
Yeah, I mean, do we need to involve the mayor? I mean, you're negotiating with the team.
That's
well,
So-
yeah, but we got to move it. I'm sorry. I just want to move it along.
Right, but, I mean, he's not the ultimate decision maker, is he? It's council, correct? Who votes on this?
My understanding is the administration will make a recommendation to council, and council will approve it.
Right,
That's what we got
we're
from
dealing with
Mr.
the
Blocher.
mayor, and the mayor isn't the final decision maker. Of course, we respect his input.
Which is why we sent the letter to him, right?
And all council, we sent
Yeah.
it to council
Right.
members also. We just didn't get a response from them.
Okay. So can you follow up on that, nail the time down?
Yes.
Pull a team together internally to meet with them?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
do that. Thank you. Mr. Davis?
My
Hold on,
question-
Mr. Hoying, just in case it's for you.
My question is actually about our outreach to council members. Are we, I don't remember where we
Regarding
landed.
this matter?
Yes, regarding this matter.
To my knowledge, we've not, unless other folks have talked to council. If you all have talked, I've not talked to council.
I've not talked to council either.
Copying them?
Yeah, we copied them on the letters.
Yeah.
But
No,
that's
I
it.
saw that, and I also saw.
You said outreach to direct
Right,
outreach?
Direct outreach.
Yeah.
I know we had a brief conversation about that at our last board meeting, but I didn't know where we landed. And I did see Mr. Silbach's comment on Twitter in regards to, don't they understand the mayor doesn't have a role in this? And I was a bit, I didn't want to respond because I didn't know. I know that at the last board meeting, there was some conversation about board members contacting city council members. While I don't necessarily think that's a great idea, I do know that we had talked prior about having a third party contact city council members, and I wanted to know where we were with that.
That's a good question. The direction of the board was to write the letter to Mayor Cranley and copy the city council to get on their calendar. Daniel followed up once, they sent a letter back, we sent another letter and say, we want to nail down dates. Daniel followed up again. So again, it's all by letter, and it was not directed to council per se. They got it.
Copy.
So I think you're right. I mean, the question again is, are we gonna do this process, have this discussion directly with council? And if so, let's just nail down a date with their folks and let's just do it. Otherwise, we could be writing letters back and forth. Ms. Bolton, your hand is up.
I agree that we're done with the letters, and I don't necessarily think we have to wait for them to call us. I think we can call them and say, and I say, once again, we have done what we're to do, and we have a negotiations team. And I would see if that functions with a meeting or two, and then I think if that's not working, then you start to do this board to council, whether it be individually or body to body, whatever, But right now, I want our negotiations people to meet with their negotiations people and see where we are. And I think that's reasonable. They're using, as I understand it from the previous letters, they're using our resolution,
Yes.
which was done in public, and more particularly, they already are developing a proposal that they'll need to share with us before they present to them, to the city folk. But I say call and say, okay, we gave you dates,
get the
and
dates.
let's do
Yeah.
it.
So that's where we are now. Ms. Bates?
Well, I agree we need to start negotiations immediately with their administration. We have to do that. But I do believe that we need to simultaneously educate the council members, because what's going to happen is that the administration of the city is going to try to do that education, and we're going to have to undo it or modify it. So somehow we have to work with council, either elected to elected or a representative from the board to the electeds, while our administration works with their administration. I feel very strongly about that.
I support that, mainly because in the letter, they keep referring to the state funding formula, and it's a non-issue. And I do think that message has to be conveyed elected to elected official. Ms. Bolton?
I think that that's going to be required, but I also don't want individual board members or the board as a body to say anything that is any different or nuanced differently from what our negotiations team is saying, because that will just prolong this mess and it will confuse everyone. So I think you send them in there, and then I do think we're going to have to go directly to council to get things done. But again, we're going to have to be very careful how we do that, whether we do it individually or as a group or with a third party. That's something we can decide after I think we hear if there's any progress from the administration. But we must be totally of one voice, which is that resolution.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Davis?
I think we should have a third party connecting with council members now. I don't think you wait until after the negotiations team, the administration is talking to administration, particularly knowing how Cincinnati City Council works. Their administration is going to be talking to city council members and probably already have. And the confusion is so great. And I've been very reluctant to, everybody knows how close I am to Greg. I've been very reluctant to even talk about it. To Ms. Bolton's point about not going outside of, where our negotiations team is going to go, I think having a third party that's both in line with our negotiations team, it understands the complex conversations, particularly around the state funding formula, and has relationships with city council would be our best route to go.
Yes. And I think that suggestion, Mr. Davis, is still looming out there. I think we were waiting, if I'm correct. I think we wanted to have that initial meeting first and bring back information, and then we can have a conversation about whether or not we do the third-party scenario. And if that's the pleasure of the board, we can just ask Mr. Hoying to move forward, get a date nailed down, meet with their team, come back with the information, and then we can make that decision, if that's okay.
How quickly can we do that?
We've not said no to a single date. We will make ourselves available whenever the city team is willing and available to meet with us.
And I don't think we should wait for that.
No, I will call again today.
Well, you can call all you want. Whether they comply or not, we don't know.
Sure.
But we can start education with the council members now. That we have control over if we want to do that. But that's the meeting with the administration to administration and begin the negotiation. They can hold out for as long as they want and just stall this whole thing, which is apparently what's happening. So I would say we start the education with the third party with the electeds as soon as we can.
I don't, well, okay. Whatever
that
the
would be a board decision.
whatever the pleasure of the board is with that. I think the stall, I think, is coming in the transition of these letters. I think once we nail down that meeting, which I think needs to happen within a couple of weeks at the least, and we need to be adamant about that, a couple of weeks. And then I think once that, I would love to have the information, what was that dialogue, and then come back. And then I think we move forward. We know pretty much, we talked about what our process needs to be, and that's part of it. But I think we got to have this information first, so we know that we're laying the foundation for making decisions about whether or not we do third party or what. So within 2 weeks?
Yeah, when is our next meeting as a board?
16th.
Deadline for us, 16th?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I just don't want to have two different avenues simultaneously. I think we get rid of the letter piece, we insist on having a meeting. Hell, they might not even do a meeting. Who knows? Then we really know what we have to do. If they say, yes, we're going to have a meeting, then at least we will see from our experts where they are in their position, and no later than that next board meeting will we need to decide about the third party. And we know who the third party is. Everybody's kind of dancing around it. And we may have to use that third party and expertise and the relationship. I don't have a problem with that, but I don't want to do two things simultaneously right now as we are moving from the letter piece to this other piece. But
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Davis?
I just don't see the simultaneous thing at all. I mean, this is two totally separate things. One is a communication administration to administration. Without moving forward, and it doesn't matter to me if it's a third party or not, but without moving forward with a communication to city council, I don't quite understand our strategy. I understand Dan is going to go make calls and get a date, communication, get a date so that the two administrations can meet. But when I leave here, there should be some strategy for communication with city council members. We've been saying this for at least 3 months. And if we're talking about potential delay, the only people that can create a stoppage to that delay would be city council members.
What is your suggestion, Mr. Davis?
My suggestion is that we work with the third party to contact city council members. One, to educate them on this, particularly the state funding formula, because I think that's a red herring that is being intentionally used by members of the city administration and the mayor. And then two, to ensure that the council members have an understanding of where the school board is. I don't know that there's been, other than being copied on the letters, any communication to city council members about our desires in regard to this negotiation.
Okay, Ms. Bolton?
I believe they received a copy of our resolution
They did.
that we passed it. So they know where this board is as a body, and the state funding piece now is moot, and maybe that's something that needs to be cleared up with them. They don't even need to be educated about it. It doesn't exist anymore as a relevant piece, unless you're trying to figure out if we lost money over the last 20 years or something, which we don't need to be figuring out at all as we move forward. So again, I think we're kind of all saying it's a matter of timing. And I do think in negotiations, you don't have multiple voices, at least in the beginning.
I agree with that, but
Can we do this?
we're
Can
not
we do this
negotiating with city council.
to accommodate, I think, the desires of what I'm hearing of the board? We're directing Mr. Hoying to go ahead and nail down a time for the team to meet with their folks. At the same time, the question about the statement, let's just get the third party who can help educate. Can we, because that is sort of a personnel issue, can we put that on the executive session agenda today? Because we have executive session after this meeting. Can we do that? That's what I'm hearing, and so you all help me with that. Say yes or no.
If we
I'd
are,
say
if we
yes.
are discussing a particular
Yes.
person, yes, we can.
We are discussing whether or not to have a third party. I heard it said, at this point, third party might be what we need. So that's what I'm suggesting.
Well, if I can speak, we
Yes.
can't discuss whether or not to have a third party. We can discuss personnel, which would be a person.
Okay.
So if we want to discuss that person and that person's
Mr.
capabilities,
Well,
then
Mr.
yes.
Davis, since was that your consideration? And Eve made a comment as well. She said something about, well, I think I know who that third party is. So I think the board has some sense of who the third party is. I'm just trying to get us done
Mr.
with
Hoying?
this.
The board is allowed to discuss the employment of a public official, if that's what.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
We will discuss that in executive session right after this meeting. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Okay. All right, last thing, in inquiries and updates. The Imagination Library discussion is not dead. There have been some things that happened since our last meeting, including the surfacing of this MOU that was in fact signed. And so in talking with the superintendent and with Mr. Hoying, felt that it was appropriate for us to, hold on, I thought they had this, I'm sorry. It's all sitting in front of me. Okay. There is actually a packet that came, but I asked the ladies to copy for you just the letter, or the MOU. So, as we all know, we had a pretty robust conversation about this, and the conversation ended up with the decision that we would consider funding it for next year. Since that time, we've been approached again to reconsider based on the fact that we have this MOU that was in fact signed by Mary Ronan in 2015. So I've asked Daniel to sort of give us an update in terms of a legal opinion about this and of the proper public purpose, which Jen was going to do that, but she's gone. So I don't know if you had conversation with Jen about that. And then the superintendent is going to weigh in as well in terms of some of her findings or decisions around that. Yes, ma'am.
My recollection, and I'm glad to see this again, I haven't seen it in a while, is that the evaluation had to, I don't know where it is, but I remember the superintendent calling me about this. Not this superintendent, the previous superintendent, that somehow the data had to prove that this was of value. Period, over and done with. Is that, it's in here, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's some attachments that are in an email, which you all haven't received just yet.
And who commissioned
Okay.
the evaluation? Was that what we just saw today?
No.
No.
Not for the imagination.
So, okay, so have we seen the data? Is that part of the email?
There is an evaluation piece to, yes, that's included there.
Mr. Landsman has presented this to you or to?
Let me tell you how it came about.
Please,
And
because-
I think what will help is if we have the superintendent speak to this, who has been involved in trying to gather all the pieces of this. Mr. Landsman called me right after the last board meeting, that he called me the next day, and it was an interesting conversation. I asked him, I said, if there is in fact an MOU, I would like to see a copy of the final MOU, and it should come from the person who owns the pilot, not him. So as a result, he pulled this stuff together, and I got an email response from Leslie Mooney, and it had all the parties. I know, Did I say that right? Malone, Malone, right,
Let's see
thank
it,
you.
Leslie.
Okay, Leslie Mooney, who is that?
Almost gave me a
Okay.
heart failure there.
And it was signed by a couple of other people whose names escape me. So those were the partners, and then there was a letter that she wrote about who the partners are and what they were asking for. So that's where we are. That's what happened. So the evaluation piece is a part of this. So let me stop talking and if I can ask the superintendent to weigh in on this as much as she can, and then we can have the discussion on it. Thank you.
So representatives from Imagination Library did do a board presentation January 2019. And that was provided by Cincinnati Children's, Every Child Capital, and Reach Out and Read. There is some data that, quite honestly, we need to have reviewed by our research and evaluation department in terms of its validity of the data. And so that has not been done. The other piece, just for points of clarification, is that, and I'm speaking since Jen is not here, there was a whole conversation around proper public purpose and the fact that Howard Fleeter and Associates provided an analysis that how these dollars could be used for this, and this is proper public purpose. Howard Fleeter is not a representative and does not work for the Ohio Department of anything. And so this was an independent opinion. It's an analysis. So he works for a public policy research firm. And so he does not represent Ohio Department of Education or Ohio Department of anything. So I just wanted to be very clear and clarify that point. Since all these conversations have taken place last week, since the last board meeting, I did reach out to Tiana Henry, who was here for the last presentation, just to find out of the students who are served. So first of all, the exact number of students who are currently being served. I shouldn't say students, children. So there are 10,864 students who are currently being served. Of the 10,000 students, approximately 500 are currently enrolled in a CPS preschool. So in a conversation with the treasurer, she and I discussed this. A program costs $35.44 per child. And that includes $25 for the books, and then $7.24 for the program cost, and then $3 for an evaluation, which totals $35.44. So if you take $35.44 and multiply it by, the exact number is 488 CPS current students. That comes up to $17,294.72. So in conversation with the treasurer, if it is the board's will, we would recommend paying for those 488 current CPS preschool students.
Mr. Morosky.
And if I remember correctly, that is what I had suggested at the last board meeting as a compromise. Because while I still believe it has proper public purpose, I operate in, again, to repeat, the real world, and we don't have the money for it, so I think that's fair compromise. And I thought that's what we had discussed the last time. Obviously, Mr. Lansmere reached out to me as well, as upset, and I was like, but our budget, we have constraints, and we can't do those things. So I think $17,000 is a palatable number, and it's a good thing, a good service to provide our kids. And again, I thought that's kind of what we had discussed.
Well, we
at the last
discussed,
meeting.
they wanted us to take on the entire project, so it
No,
wasn't just.
right.
Yeah, okay. Ms. Bowers.
And also,
I'm
not
sorry.
finished. Also, the data is part of the public record and was presented at the Student Achievement Committee meeting with Ms. Bolton and Mr. Davis, and it was that same data plus additional data that there would have been concerns. Just to remind everyone, this conversation that Ms. Bowers had brought up at the board meeting, she had concerns with the data too. So this is all repeat just for whoever, the 7 people watching, or whoever's edification, that we had this is the first I'd seen this. It would have maybe been helpful if someone had provided this a year ago, but I just wanted to say that piece.
Well, the reason, I just wanted to comment on that, because the reason why the data is a repeat, and I realized it was a repeat when they sent it to me, but I asked for the original. This is what I asked for, the original. I didn't even think this was the original. So what we got was stuff that we already had. So I just wanted to be clear about that. It wasn't like, I asked for the same stuff. So, Ms. Bowers.
I just want to clarify, Superintendent Mitchell, you said that the district is willing to provide the books to the 486 students. You mean currently this year? Because I know the proposal last week was starting next school year.
Right. Yes. So to be quite honest with you, our interest has been in finding a productive way forward and to be able to provide services for our kids as soon as possible. And so I just inquired as to the number of kids, and when it came back as low as it is, $17,000 we felt was feasible for this year.
Okay, good. Mr. Davis.
Have we met with the folk at those groups that you read? Capital, whoever is.
So I have met with Leslie Maloney, Tiana Henry, and Tiana, when you come down, Dr., I can't remember, doctor, from Children's Hospital. So she's going to come down, because I don't remember all the people who were sitting around the table.
I got you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, Dr. Greg Zumlas, he's a pediatrician, but he is our medical advisor, or our medical director for the program. Again, this is the same program where we sign them up when they come to the clinic well child check. So a child can be at a newborn child check, and the money that it's paid for, the $35.44, will have that child getting free books as a newborn. And then when they turn 5, they will receive their last book. So that means they get a book every month until they turn the age of 5, an age-appropriate book and books that are approved by a committee.
So you've met previously with them, and then there is a meeting that they're asking the district to be a part of on September 19th. I didn't know if you got that message or not, Superintendent. But they're asking for us to come to that meeting, and it's a meeting of the partners, is what I'm understanding.
So I don't, at this time, have that meeting on my calendar.
We can, I'll shoot you the email on that. Okay. Other questions, Ms. Bolton?
I don't have a question, but I just want to reiterate what Mr. Morosky mentioned, and we just have some numbers now to put by it, which is that we said, and we've also moved to a certain extent with that, in that we did not feel, administration or the board, even with the relentless effort by Mr. Morosky to convince us otherwise, we did not reach a conclusion that this is how we spend the taxpayers' money, is on non-CPS students. And that we reached, I think, consensus as a group in the administration, and now it sounds as though one part of that move would be that we would be willing to start in this budget year, and because we could do it, because it's such a smaller amount, then frankly, they've taken a step back for the future of these children by insisting on this, because now with these numbers, we can start this year, but we've lost the overall picture that we were kind of going for as a partner. I got a call from Mr. Landsman as well, and there was some belief that not only this MOU guaranteed it, but that somehow we couldn't afford not to do it, and I'll leave it at that. And we can't afford to not do it because we can't afford to do it.
Okay, thank you. I hope that kind of clears things up, but that's where we are now. But, so I'm, from the board's will with the superintendent's recommendation, are we good with that? And I believe then you would probably incorporate that in the next report.
488, right?
Yes, for the 488 students. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other inquiries and updates? Assignments? Mr. Morosky?
Yeah, I would like to reference back to my transportation comment and the attendance maps for all of our high schools. So dot attendance map for all of our high schools would be great to really start to dig in on the work that'll happen in SAC, I believe.
Little people.
And I thought we had elementaries. We just had those few. So yeah, if I can make it a little bigger, attendance dot maps for every school.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Bates?
And to kind of piggyback on that, we also, while we're looking at this data, we need to do some engagement because there's an impression out in the community that this board has already voted on new boundaries without input from the community, and that is not true. We've discussed it, but we have not voted on it. So somehow, with this information that is going to be presented in a different way, so that we can look at what we can do to, to better organize the district in our systems and our schools, we need to also engage the community in some of this work as well, at least in the beginning, to let them know that we are in the very beginning stages of doing that and decisions haven't been made.
I would actually encourage a full-fledged discussion under board matters about that. I feel I agree with you 100%. I've heard it in the community. People are sending emails. So yes, I agree with that. Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, I think that's correct, especially as it pertains to the east side that emanated or began in the policy committee, not in the student achievement committee, because the community brought to us the concerns about the overcrowding at PRM, and they had some suggestions that we said no to. And so we tried to find some other alternatives. The board has actually, though, voted when they created the CANS boundaries. The board has had a vote on just those schools in the north central part of the district. But on the east side, no, nothing has happened there. And there is great pressure right now as we're looking at 600 more units going into Madisonville that we even know about. So there is some sense of urgency to these boundary lines.
Thank you.
Can I ask a point of clarification?
Yes.
So for the elementary, this dot attendance map, are you also asking for magnet? And the only reason I'm asking that, that's not the only reason, but the magnet process is going to start extremely soon. It's been moved closer to the beginning of the school year, so it starts in October. So just, is it magnet as well? Okay.
Okay. Any other assignments?
I have one.
Yes.
I'd really like the administration to review the limited use of Power School.
Of what?
Of Power School, both from a standpoint of communicating with our families about such things as buses, but more particularly communicating, regarding their students and their child's achievement. Because we could really have a very different approach about everything if indeed the parents knew what they need to know and had access, and we found a way to make that possible. And Power School is at least it's the tool we have. And if it's only 30% of our folks using it, we know what 30% we're talking about.
I want to can I comment?
Yes,
on that?
Ms. Bowers.
Working in schools for years and schools coming up with creative ideas to engage parents, a lot of parents, that is not a priority to look up what's going on with their kids. Yes, it's accessible. Yes, they're signed up. They even have passwords. But a lot of parents I ask, have you looked on your child's PowerSchool report? No, they don't use it. The reasons why they don't use it is because they say they don't have time. There's so many other stemming, pressing issues that are going on in their life. So I don't know if the 30% is they're not enrolled, or it's the 30% of use. I don't know which one that was. There are lots of parents that are signed up, but not a lot of parents, they just don't use it.
Okay. Oh, Ms. Worley.
Your question is, it is 30% of people, 30% of our parents who have a PowerSchool account.
Okay.
And to your point, that's how we talk to them about notifications. Anything happening in the school, that's how we communicate with them. So oftentimes the school have a separate email list, but to your point, Board Member Bowers, that's where their grades are and their attendance. So you will see as part of that attendance campaign a real push around PowerSchool. If you step in the customer care, one of the things we ask people to do while they're waiting is sign up for their PowerSchool account, because that app also means even if you have a phone that got turned off or something like that, you can access the app and the desktop version at the library so that you can still access the information. You get a new phone, you download the app, we don't lose your phone number. It's really powerful for us. So we're open to any and all ideas about how we can communicate with parents about the importance of having that single little app that gives them so much information.
There's also the promotion of Schoology, and sometimes that gets confusing for
Right.
even me. Like,
Right,
what's you, Schoology or PowerSchool? I don't know
Because
which one to
Schoology
use.
has the lessons,
Yes.
whereas PowerSchool has the grades and the attendance piece. So in many cases, they need two apps for those two reasons. But if we had one message to say to parents, which we know people, one message, one time, it's PowerSchool. And if we could get through to them in PowerSchool, we're going to be able to get a hold of them in a crisis situation, if that would ever happen to be the case, or their attendance and other notifications as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any other assignments? All right, I need a motion to recess into executive session to consider employment of a public employee or official, appointment of a public official, pending or imminent court action in conference with board legal counsel.
So moved.
And I'd like to add one, matters pertaining to security.
So moved.
Okay. Ms. Hughes, please call roll.
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you.